Hi there, I'm Michael and welcome to the second video of building your first Power BI report. Before we get started, please subscribe to my YouTube channel for further videos. Okay then, my assumption in this course is that Power BI is new to you, but you want to get familiar with it quickly. With that assumption in mind, my goal is to give you just enough information and show just enough features so that you can see what Power BI is capable of. But I'll keep the concepts and demonstrations at a relatively high level. In this report, I'm going to teach you the process of report building from beginning to end, and here's the report you're going to build and publish to the Power BI service. It's quite a simple report with charts on the table and some static elements for the title and the image you see in the top left corner. It's just enough to teach you the basics of report building in Power BI, and it's interactive too, which happens automatically. You just need to put the pieces together and Power BI takes care of the rest. This course will teach you how to prepare data for a report, which includes importing data from one or more sources, transforming the data to improve the way it looks, and handles for your report, and cleansing the data. And then after that, you learn about designing data models, which includes defining relationships between tables, configuring properties in the model to control the behavior of data elements, and adding calculations to perform on the data that you'll include in a report. Then lastly, you'll learn about creating the report itself, from adding individual elements such as charts or tables, and customizing the appearance of report elements. And then when everything is finished, you'll learn how to publish your report. I'll refer back to this roadmap often throughout the course so that you can track your progress on your learning. In this module, I'm going to introduce the Power Query Editor that's available in the Power BI desktop application that you can download for free from Microsoft. No matter how simple or complex your data is, you'll always use the Power Query Editor to import the data into Power BI. Now, there are many different types of data sources that you can import into Power BI. In some cases, the import step may be all that you need to do to get data for your reporting, but it's not uncommon that you have to do some additional work to get the data ready. The official phrase that we use in the data management field to describe that additional work is transforming data. The Power Query Editor includes a lot of features that you can use for transformations. Again, in this module, we'll review only a few of the possibilities, but we'll definitely cover the more common transformations, and you'll see how to know what other options exist. A subset of the data transformation task in the Power Query Editor is used for cleansing data. This group of tasks is used to fix data quality problems, such as bad characters in the data as just one example. By the time you finish this module, you'll have a good understanding of the steps you need to take to get your data into Power BI and to shape it up in preparation for building a report. There are so many different types of data available, and Power BI makes it easy to access that data, whether it's on your computer, on a database server, or in the cloud. The types of data sources that Power BI supports automatically is pretty extensive, and it's growing all the time. So whenever you update the Power Desktop application, you should take a look at the data sources to see if there's anything new that you might like to use in Power BI. In this module, we're going to work with data about films. I have an Excel file that you can download by using the exercise file link in the description of this video. I created it by downloading some data from IMDb. That's a website with information about films, and then I filtered the dataset down to just films released between 2014 and 2018, so that we have enough data to do some transformations and reporting. But the size of the data is small enough so that we can do our work quickly. And I combined it with Academy Awards data about awards and nominations. Power BI has a special way to store the data that you import, which compresses the data to a smaller size and optimizes the structure of the data for fast reporting. The Power BI desktop application holds the data in memory, which is another reason why reports can respond fast to changes. And when you close the application, the data stays in its compressed and optimized format as a PBIX file. And remember, there's so many more data sources that are supported. But regardless of what you need to use for your projects, you'll see that it's pretty easy to get your data into Power BI if you know where it is, and if the right security permissions to access it. From here, you can continue learning more about Power BI by viewing my other courses on Power Query, modeling data in Power BI, and DAX, with several other courses covering different aspects of using Power BI. Now let's get you started on this journey with the Building Your First Power BI Report free course here on my YouTube channel. In this first demonstration, I'm going to show you what the Power BI desktop application looks like when you open it, and show you how you can check which version you're using. Then, I'll show you how you can see what types of data you can import, and then you'll specifically see how to import an Excel file. If you want to follow along throughout this course, you do need to download the exercise files. Here, I have the Power BI desktop application installed and running on my computer. You can download this application for free from Microsoft using the link that I've specified in the exercise files that accompany this course. Okay, let's close the startup page by clicking the X in the top right-hand corner. It's important to understand that Power BI is constantly changing, so depending on which version you have downloaded and whether you have updated it or not, you might see some differences. So, just by way of explanation, let me show you under the Help tab on the ribbon. There is an About button, and you can see here that I'm working with the July 2022 version of the Power BI desktop application. So if you see things that are different on your screen from what you see on my screen, it's very likely to be a difference in the version. Now we're looking at the first screen available in the Power BI desktop application, which happens to be the Report Designer. Now this course is about building your first report, but we can't build the report yet until we have some data. So let's go and import some data. On the Home tab of the ribbon, we have the Get Data button. Actually, it's a button that we need to click to show more buttons. And Microsoft has listed the most common data sources on the first menu that displays here. We can get a complete list of the data sources supported for the current version of the Power BI desktop application by clicking More. And here, you can get a complete list of all the possible sources, and you can also filter this list to specific types such as databases. So every time you get a new update to the application, you might want to peruse this list to see what's available. From time to time, you'll see some data sources listed with beta in the parentheses after the data source name. And that lets you know that that particular data connection is still a work in progress and could potentially change in some future version of the desktop application. For our purposes, we're going to import a file type coming from Excel. I could select Excel in the list here, or I can click the button on the ribbon, or on the Report Designer, Import Data from Excel. These all do the same thing. So once I click Connect, you can see that the extracted files for this course is on my desktop, and this data is found in the Power BI Building First Report Data folder. Power BI opens the file, and then it says that there are two objects contained in here. One is a sheet, and one is a table that exists on this sheet. When I click Table 3, we can see here are some column headers with data. And we can scroll to the right to see all the columns. And when I select the checkbox next to the element of the worksheets that I want to import into Power BI, I then have two buttons available, presuming that I don't want to cancel this operation. There's the Transform Data button, which allows me to make some changes if necessary to the data before I start using it with reporting. So let's go ahead and choose the Load option. Power BI creates a connection, loads the data, and it shows us how many rows of data were loaded. And it adds a table, and we can see each column represented in that table becomes a field over here to the right of my report designer. Sometime after you load data into Power BI, the data is not quite ready in its current state for reporting. Fortunately, you have lots of options for transforming that data. There are some transformations that you may use only occasionally, and there are some that you will probably use all the time. A very common task is to eliminate columns. Because Power BI requires memory to hold all your data, you should consider whether you really need all the data that you've imported. When you start working with a particular data source, you might not know if you need it or not, but that's okay. You can always eliminate one or more columns from a query at any time. And if you delete a column and decide you need it later, it's really easy to add it back in again. Another common task is to filter rows, which you would do for the same reason as eliminating columns. That is, you filter rows when you don't need all the data. Power BI supports both simple and complex filters. A simple filter has just one rule defining what to keep or remove, whereas a complex filter has multiple rules using and/or logic for a more specific definition of what to keep or remove. A third common task is to fix up metadata. That might be as simple as renaming a query or renaming a column, or you might fix a data type. Although it's possible to make these changes elsewhere in Power BI, such as in the data model itself, which you'll learn about later, it's a good idea to do as much as you can in the query editor, because you can save these rules to the Power BI service as an object called a dataset. And then you can reuse that final version of the dataset without having to start over from the beginning and repeating these transformation steps each time that you want to create a new PBIX file using the same data. Okay, so in this part of the video, we're going to be doing eliminating columns in a query. Let me show you how to perform transformations now. First, I'll demonstrate how to eliminate columns in a query, and to access the Power Query editor from the report designer so that you can apply transformations to the data, click the Transformation Data button, and then click the Transform Data command below the button. When the query editor is open, we're ready to start performing some transformations. Now, there's no particular order in which you need to do this. Sometimes it's just trial and error. You make a change, see what happens, try something else, you fine-tune it, and then maybe discover you did something you didn't mean to do. Then you can undo it. We're going to take a bit more methodological approach than we might in real life, by starting with simply eliminating columns that we don't need from our query. So I'll just start with the query named Table 3 right now. And title type, when I look at it, I can see everything contains the same value, movie. And if I click the drop-down box list here, I can see what else might be in there. Now, Power BI does tell me that the list may be incomplete. I can click Load More for it to analyze the complete set. And as it starts loading the complete data set, it turns out that there really is only one value, movie, in there. And that's not particularly useful to me. So that is a column that I can delete. So when I select a column, notice that the colour of the column header changes to show what is currently selected. When I right-click a selected column, a context menu displays, and I can choose to remove the selected column. Now, there is an option to reverse that process. Maybe I have more columns to delete than to keep. I can select a column and choose the option to remove all the other columns, that is, unselected columns. But in this case, I really am just going to select the remove option. So, as I continue to review the remaining columns, I'll keep this one that contains the title of the movie. But I don't need the original title. So we'll just repeat the process, select the column, right-click, and select the remove command. End year doesn't seem to have any data in it, so we'll remove that column as well. The thing you should be aware of is that if you make a mistake and accidentally delete something that you did not intend to delete, it's easy to fix. Over on the right-hand side, below the properties for the selected query, there's a list of applied steps. And if you select on each step, you can see what the data looks like at that point in time. In other words, when that step is applied. So we start with the source. And notice that the little gear icon here allows me to see what that source is. When I click on it, it displays a dialog block. And then the next step selected one of the elements off that page, which happened to be a table. Next, it changed some data types. And this is a little bit harder to see, so I'm going to go back up and look at the column. Notice next to each column header there's an icon. Let's go to change type. You see that it's changed. That's a data type change that Power BI automatically applied, and we'll learn more about that a little bit later. So if I made a mistake here, I can simply click this X to the left of removed columns, and the columns will reappear. There is no redo here. I simply have to repeat that step to eliminate those columns in the first place. So I can put back that removed column step, and there you have our first transformations. Now, I'll demonstrate how to filter rows in a query. And we don't have to do a lot of that to do in here, but just as a reminder, in the first table we only have films from 2014 to 2018. One type of filtering that we can do is explicit filtering, where we actually clear all the checkboxes and find values that we want. So if we select all and filter everything, and there's one way to do this, and that's valid, but hypothetically, imagine if you were working with data coming from a database that's getting refreshed periodically. If you make an explicit selection like 2014 to 2018, then as you get to 2019 and 2020 data and so on, these would never appear. So as an alternative option would be to go ahead and select all here and point to the number of filters so that we can see the context menu that applies to the number of filters. And you can see, because this is a number column, we have operators like equals, does not equal, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or between. So if we wanted to have a dynamic range that includes years as they get added to the list, we can select the greater than or equal to. and we can put in 2014. Notice while we're here that we have an opportunity to add a second filter criteria and use either and or logic with that. And if that's enough, we can continue to add multiple criteria, and then between those we can select and or logic. In the advanced area, we can add further clauses. But in this case, year greater than or equal to 2014 is just fine. Now, as you can see, the applied step is actually applied to the middle of the steps. So I'm just going to move this down to the very bottom, because this is our last step that's been applied. Now also notice at the top of the column, there is a filter icon to let us know that we applied a filter. And in the applied steps, you can see the filtered row steps. And if you click the gear icon, you have access to the dialog box where you can configure that filter. So if you need to change it, you have the opportunity to do so. Now, in this demonstration, I'll show you how to fix metadata. In this case, the metadata involves fixes such as renaming columns and adjusting data types. Sometimes these names of things aren't particularly helpful for me to build a report. So one of the first things I like to do after I create a query is to rename the things that I need to rename, whether that's at a query level or at a column level. So let's start with our first item here, which is the table 3. I'm going to rename this as movies. And for the columns, I'm going to rename tconst here. If I right click and rename at the bottom, I can put in the movie ID as the new title of the column. And then if I go to primary title, I will rename this as title. Start year, I'm going to rename as release year. For runtime minutes, I will rename as duration. And I will rename genres with a capital G. And then so on for the remaining columns. I will rename awards with a capital A for awards, capital N for nominations, and then capital B and P for best picture. Now, all these are purely a matter of personal preference. So what I'm going to do is review all the data types. I will scan through the columns to make sure everything is either set to a text or numeric value. If you remember earlier, the icons beside the title of the columns state that value. So movie ID is set as text, release year, decimal number, or whole number in this instance, sorry. Now Now collectively, eliminating columns, filtering rows, fixing metadata are the most common type of transformations that you're likely to encounter. There are so many different options that we have for transforming data in the Power Query editor. We can't go through all of them in this module, but there are a few more transformations that we need to make to the demonstration data so that it's ready for reporting. I wouldn't consider this group the most common types of transformations, but I do use them quite often, and you might probably need to do so as well. So let's take a look. First, we have the option to duplicate a query. It works like it sounds. You literally make a copy of an existing query, including all of the transformation steps from the import to whatever steps were applied to the query after that point. And now you have double the data associated with the query at this point. You can then make changes to each of those two queries separately and refine the results to whatever you need. So by the time you finish, you might not have double the data after all. Another type of transformation is the split by delimiter. And you use this option when you have a column with data that you want to separate into multiple columns. For example, if you had the full name of a person in a single column, you might want to split the full name by the space between the first and the last name. And then you'd wind up with two columns. The number of columns that you end up with after the transformation depends on what you configure the transformation to split on. Yet, another type of transformation is Unpivot. Essentially, what this does is to take data that is spread out across multiple columns and convert that data into new rows. Each column included in the Unpivot becomes two columns in the resulting query after the fact. One column holds the header text for the original column, and the second column holds whatever was in the first row for that column. But this will be easier to understand when you see the Unpivot demonstration. Okay, let's continue our work on the movies data by duplicating the query from the initial data import. Currently, we have imported data from the source and removed some columns, renamed some of the columns, but there's an additional step that I'd like to take. Specifically, rather than have a column of genre for each movie, where sometimes we have single genres such as the documentary here, and sometimes we may have multiples, so biography documentary here and here. Instead, what I'd like to be able to do would be to identify any movie that's a documentary, regardless if that's the only genre defined for that movie or whether it's one of several. And the best way for me to be able to filter any movies that would like to be a list of genres and create a unique list of those genre values. So I need to remove it from this movie query and then create a separate query where I map individual genre values to specific movies. So the first step in that process would be to duplicate the query. And I can do this by right-clicking Movies and then selecting the option Duplicate. Now, as you can see, we've copied the movies query. So what I'm going to do is I'll rename this as genres. And I'll go back to the initial movies table and remove that genres column because I no longer need it there. So I right click and then click remove. Instead, in my genres query, I'm going to keep movie ID and eliminate all the other columns except for genres and movie ID. So I will select title, release year, duration, awards, nomination, best picture, and then right click and then remove columns. Now I have a duplicate query where it starts the same as the original movies, but then I'm able to further manipulate it to make changes differently than I could with the original movies query. So any changes that I make to either query, even though it's rooted in the same source and subsequent steps, they both take different paths and are completely different queries and are held in memory as two distinct queries themselves. In this demonstration, I show you how to use the split column by delimiter command. Now that I have created my genres query, I have another step to create a set of distinct values so that for any given movie I can filter on a single genre name as opposed to the combinations that we can currently see in this column. To do this, my first step is to split by delimiter, because those genres are currently separated by commas. So if I right click on the genres column, I can select the split to column here, and then I have a choice of how I want to split that column. And you can see there are a variety of choices here. Incidentally, if you prefer to use the ribbon instead of right clicking a column, you can do that as well. In the home ribbon, you can see the split column option here. Once you click, you can see the same options in either place to the right click. In this case, I'm just going to select by delimiter because I have a character to use here, and that character is automatically detected by Power BI as a comma. You can see that there are other supported delimiters, and if what you're looking for is not there, simply select the custom option at the bottom here, and then you're able to type one or more characters that represent your delimiter. I'll send this back to the comma, and you can see split once with the leftmost delimiter, split once if I choose the rightmost delimiter, or split at each occurrence of the delimiter. And in that case, I will get at least 3 columns, maybe more if there's something with 4 genres, and we'll find out as soon as I click OK. So now that the process is complete, we have in fact only 3 possible values. So you can see where there was a single value. I have documentary in the first column, and then in the second and the third column we have no values. Power BI automatically named these new columns, and because column names need to be distinct within the same query, it appends these as point 1, point 2, point 3, and if there were more columns, it would go to point 4, and so on. Of course, there's more to do, and this time I will show you how to use the Unpivot transformation, which will transform the separate genre columns into rows. Earlier, I successfully separated out all the genres, but now I have these 3 columns. And that's not particularly useful when it's structured this way. Instead, what I would like to do is take these values that are spread across multiple columns, and we'll transform this so that each of those columns becomes a new row, so that we can successfully map a single movie to one or more of the genres. And the process is very simple by using an Unpivot option. I can either hold down my Shift key and click the first genre column and click the last genre column, and then right click and select the Unpivot only selected columns. There is also on the Transform tab of our ribbon the Unpivot only selected columns. So if I go to Transform, you should be able to see the Unpivot columns here, and then you'll be able to select the option. So what we're going to do is select the unpivot only columns. And when I do this, we can see that the movie ID column stayed the same, but you can see the column headers are now placed into the attribute column. So we have genres 1, 2, and 3, and we have the respective values for our column. So now those have been unpivoted to go from columns into rows. Now that we've done this, I can delete the attribute column here, and you have to be careful you're only deleting what you intend to, so it doesn't hurt to click again just to make sure that you're selecting the one thing that you want to remove. So right click and remove, and then I'm left with value, which I will now name as genre. And there I have a mapping of each movie to the one or more genres that it has been associated with by using a combination of transformations, the last of which was Unpivot. To create accurate and meaningful reports, you need to clean data. There are times, however, when the data that you have to work with is not as clean as you'd like it to be. Fortunately, Power BI includes several transformations that are designed to solve this very problem. Probably the most common problem is the need to fix values in the data. When you have data that does not conform to some standard definition in a column, maybe you have characters that are unusual, as an example, or maybe you have abbreviations where you need terms spelled out. You can easily replace these values. It's a very easy process to identify the characters that you do not want in your data, and then to provide replacement characters so that you can have your data look the way you want it to. In the next demonstration, I'll show you how to use the replace value transformation. There are several other transformations that I will not cover in this module, but you should know about. One of those is trim, which removes white space from values in a column from either the beginning or at the end of the text. You can also create a column of data by using a formulae language that is specific to Power Query Editor. That language is known as M, by the way. You can use it to create conditional logic to clean up data in a column and then store the clean results in a new column. That's definitely an advanced topic though. Sometimes some of the rows have data that, for whatever reason, have the wrong data type for the column that it's in. And then when you apply a transformation intended for one day to type, the transformation step returns an error in the rows having the wrong data type. Now, you cannot filter out those rows using the normal filter method, but there is a specific option to remove errors that will eliminate those rows from your query if you determine that you don't need them after all. Of course, you should use this option with care so that you do not eliminate rows that you really need. And last, there's the remove duplicates transformation, which keeps only one row when there are multiple rows containing the same value. If you use that transformation, only the row containing the first instance of a value starting from the first row is kept in the query, and any other rows containing the same value are removed. You'll see how to perform some data cleansing by using the replace values command to remove data that doesn't belong in a selected column. So first of all, we're going to click on the movies query. I believe in my film titles, if I were to do a sort ascending, I will find a whole bunch of movies that start with a hash. So as you can see here, we have hashes. So what I'm going to do is replace those values. And notice that when I right click on a cell, it populates the whole thing as soon as I click replace values. And I can just eliminate the characters so that I'm just down to the hash sign. And eliminate those from the strings. As soon as I click OK, the hash has now been removed. So now we're going to go into the genres query. And if we filter on genres, go through the data, and we can see this /n in the data set. So if we scroll through, you can see here on row 71, we have the /n. So the same concept, we right click, place values, and then in this instance, what I'm going to do is not replace it with a space bar, but I'll replace it with unknown, mainly because this movie ID is unknown. So now if we go back to genre, there shouldn't be any more /n's, but as you can see here, all of them have been replaced with unknown. Now, everything kind of looks good for me, and when I'm finished, and to bring all those changes and load the data into the data model, I will now go to the home ribbon and select close and apply, or just apply or just close. So if I go to close and apply, we can see both close and apply, apply and close. If I close this, then the transformation steps that I've defined stay in the file, but I won't see my data in my reports until I select either apply, which would leave the editor open, or close and apply, which closes the editor, connects to the data sources, reads the transformations, and then we will have successfully brought data into our data model. This module was a short tour of the key features of the Power BI query editor, just enough to get you ready to start building your first Power BI report. To build a report, you need data. So our first step in the Power Query Editor was to get data. Because we imported the data, Power BI made a compressed and optimized copy of the data that it stores as a PBIX file. Whenever you have a PBIXI file open, Power BI loads that same data into memory so that your report development process is as efficient as possible. Our next step in the Power BI query editor was to apply transformations to the data. Specifically, we removed data by eliminating columns and filtering out rows of data that we don't need in the reports. The benefit of eliminating columns and rows is a reduction in the amount of memory required by Power BI to hold the data while we're building reports. We also fixed up metadata for the queries by renaming the queries themselves, renaming columns, and adjusting data types. That way, the report we eventually build will be easier to understand, and it will behave properly when we're working with numbers or text. We also used some more specialized transformations, such as duplicating a query, splitting by delimiter, and unpivoting, so that we could extract out a distinct set of genres from the movie query. Our final step in the Power Query editor was to use transformations that blends the data. Some of our queries had characters that are unusual, that we eliminated, and that were different options for doing that. Now, although our review of the query editor transformations did not cover every possible transformation, by now you should be comfortable working with common transformations and know how to work with the ribbon and context menus to find and to use the other transformations. Remember, you can always try out a transformation if you're not sure what it does, and then delete the step from your query if the results are not what you need. In the next module, we'll shift our focus from the queries to the model editor, because there's some more work we need to do before we can build that first report. Now, please subscribe to my channel to keep updated for the next video release to this free course and other top tips in Power BI.